A decade ago, experts couldn't even argue on how long an EV battery would survive. Today, over 90% of EVs older than 10 years are still running on their original battery. The question every EV buyer eventually asks. Millions of electric vehicles are now approaching or have already passed the 10-year mark. That means the question that early adopters could only guess at is finally being answered, with real data, not predictions. So what actually happens to an EV battery after a decade of charging, driving, heat, cold, and daily use? For years, the exception was grim. Back when EVs first hit the road, industry estimates put battery lifespan at somewhere around 7 years, with nobody entirely sure. That's a problem when the average car on the road today is driven for well over a decade. The reality looks nothing like that fear. Lithium-ion batteries age in two ways. Calendar aging happens just from time passing, even if the car sits untouched. Cyclical aging happens from actual use, charging, and discharging over and over. Neither one is avoidable, but the pattern researchers keep finding is what matters here. Battery degradation follows an S-curve. There's a modest early drop, then a long flat plateau, then eventually a steeper decline. Researchers who study this compare it to breaking in a pair of shoes. Stiff at first, comfortable for a long stretch, and only showing serious wear at the very end. Data pulled from tens of thousands of vehicles shows that early drop-off sits around 5%, and used EVs coming off a lease at 2 to 4 years old are testing with battery health scores above 95%. Broader testing across nearly 80,000 EVs found an average battery health of 92% across the fleet. Now, zoom into the actual 10-year plus cars. Among EVs a decade or older, fewer than 1 in 10 have ever needed a battery replacement. That means over 90% of them are still running on the exact battery pack they left the factory with. Compare that to what a 2010 prediction would have told you, and the gap between expectation and reality is enormous. Part of the reason comes down to how batteries were originally tested. Lab testing traditionally cycles a battery from very high charge to very low charge over and over, as fast as possible. That's brutal on a cell. Real driving looks nothing like that. You accelerate, you coast, you sit at a red light, you plug in overnight. Every one of those moments is gentler on the pack than a lab stress test. Researchers studying real-world data now believe those old lab-based predictions were simply too harsh, and that batteries used in normal daily life age far more gracefully than the original models assumed. Which EV batteries age the best? Not every EV battery ages identically. The batteries come down to chemistry, management systems, and manufacturing quality. One of the most detailed independent studies to date looked at over 8,000 electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles across 36 makes, ranging from brand new to 12 years old, with mileage up to roughly 160,000 miles. The average battery health across the entire fleet landed at just over 95% of original capacity. Even vehicles between 8 and 9 years old were still holding around 85%. Vehicles that had crossed 100,000 miles maintained somewhere between 88 and 95% battery health, depending on how sophisticated their battery management system was. Here's the surprising part. Mileage barely mattered. Younger EVs that had been driven a lot actually outperformed older EVs that had barely been driven at all. Sitting idle doesn't protect a battery. It just ages the calendar instead of the odometer. Tesla's own long-term data backs this up at scale. The company has reported degradation of only around 12% after 200,000 miles on its own Model S and Model X packs. And larger battery packs tend to degrade even more slowly than smaller ones. Newer battery chemistry is further changing the picture. A growing share of EVs now use lithium iron phosphate or LFP cells instead of the nickel-based chemistries common in early EVs. LFP batteries tend to hold up longer over time, which is part of why manufacturers keep shifting toward them. It's also worth noting that most of the packs in that 8,000 vehicle study were built on older nickel-based chemistry produced back when quality controls across the industry wasn't nearly as refined as it is now. Several major automakers went through very public battery teething problems in their early EV years, the kind that led to large-scale recalls. Most of those issues had since been resolved. So in a strange way, today's 8 and 9-year-old batteries represent something close to a worst-case scenario for modern EVs, built on rougher, early technology, yet still holding up at 85% capacity. Batteries built today with better chemistry and more mature manufacturing are expected to age even more slowly than that. The biggest reasons batteries lose capacity. Age alone isn't really the villain here. What actually drives faster degradation comes down to 4 habits. Frequent DC fast charging is the biggest one. Rapid charging pushes a huge amount of energy into the battery in a short window, and that stress adds up over hundreds of sessions. Occasional fast charging on a road trip is fine. Making it your daily habit is where the wear accumulates. Extreme temperatures are next. Heat is especially harsh on lithium-ion chemistry, which is why owners in hot climates are consistently told to park in the shade or in a garage whenever possible. Cold weather causes temporary range loss too, but it's less damaging to long-term battery health than sustained heat. Keeping the battery parked at 100% for long stretches also accelerates wear, and so does routinely letting it sit near empty. Batteries prefer to live in the middle of their range. Daily charging to somewhere around 80% with a full charge reserved for road trips keeps the pack in a gentler zone. And then there are the poor charging habits in general. Ignoring software updates that improve battery management, skipping the occasional slow charge in favor of fast charging every time, or letting a car sit for months without being driven or maintained. Every automaker builds in buffers at the top and bottom of the battery that you never actually see or access, which already protect against the worst-case scenarios. But the habits above still shape how gracefully a battery ages within that buffer. If you're the kind of person who wants the real numbers before making a decision like this, subscribe now because we're about to get into exactly what to check before buying one. Can you still road trip with a 10-year-old EV? Reduced capacity sounds alarming on paper. In practice, it's far less dramatic. Take a real example. A Tesla Model S built in one of the company's earliest production runs. Now over a decade old with roughly 200,000 miles on it, was originally rated for 265 miles of range. Today it delivers 220. That works out to about 83% of its original capacity, and the owner describes the car as still performing like new off the line. A separate case, a 2014 BMW i3, never a long-range car to begin with, now manages roughly 55 miles per charge in winter. The owner still drives it daily, says maintenance costs are close to nothing, and has no plans to spend thousands of dollars replacing the battery for a car that already does exactly what he needs it to do. For longer trips, the mindset that matters most is charging opportunistically instead of waiting till the battery is nearly empty. Stopping for food or a break and topping up to 80%, even when you didn't need to, means shorter charging trips later in the trip. Statistically, the vast majority of daily trips fall well under 100 miles anyway. So even a battery sitting at 80 or 85% of its original capacity still covers nearly all real-world driving without issue. Charging speed also isn't static across a car's life. Reduced capacity does mean slightly less usable range between stops, but it rarely changes how fast the car can actually charge, since that's mostly a function of the charging hardware and thermal management rather than raw capacity. A 10-year-old EV on a modern fast charger can still add meaningful range in well under an hour on a road trip, even with a decade of wear behind it. The honest takeaway? A 10-year-old EV with normal degradation is still a fully road trip capable car. It just asks you to plan slightly differently than a gas car would. Would I buy a 10-year-old EV? This is the question that actually matters to most buyers. The short answer is yes, with a few checks first. Start with the battery health percentage, not the odometer. A newer EV with high mileage often has a healthier battery than an older EV that's barely been driven. Mileage tells you less than most buyers assume. Ask for the battery health report if the seller has one, or use a diagnostic tool that can pull state of health data directly from the car. Many EVs and third-party apps can generate this on the spot. Check whether the battery has already been replaced. If it has, under warranty, that's often a positive sign rather than a red flag. It usually means a newer, sometimes improved pack is now in the car. Confirm what's left on the battery warranty. Most manufacturers cover batteries for 8 years or 100,000 miles, guaranteeing at least 70% of the original capacity during that period. If the car still falls under that coverage, any dramatic future decline is the manufacturer's problem, not yours. Some states extend that coverage even further, and a handful of automakers now guarantee a decade of coverage from the start. And be realistic about range. Whatever the manufacturer originally claimed, expect real-world range to run meaningfully lower than the sticker number, especially in winter. That's true of every EV, new or old, and it has nothing to do with a decade of aging. One more thing worth checking: how the previous owner charged it. A service history or charging app log, if the seller has access to one, can tell you whether the car spent most of its life on gentle home charging or constant fast charging. Two identical 10-year-old EVs with the same mileage can have noticeably different battery health depending entirely on how they were treated. So that history is often more useful than the odometer reading by itself. Buy with those numbers in hand, and a 10-year-old EV stops being a gamble and starts looking like a genuinely practical used car. The biggest surprise here isn't that EV batteries lose some capacity over time. Every battery does. Phones, laptops, power tools, all of it. What's surprising is how many EVs are still performing far better than anyone expected, a decade or more after leaving the factory. Cars once treated as a financial gamble because of battery uncertainty are now routinely crossing 150,000, 200,000, even 300,000 miles on their own original pack, sitting at 80 or 90% of the capacity they started with. The predictions from 15 years ago were built on lab tests that stress batteries far harder than real driving ever does. Real-world use, it turns out, is gentler than anyone modeling it in a lab assumed. Batteries built to handle worst-case testing are aging even better under normal everyday conditions. So here's the real question worth asking. If 10-year-old EV batteries are already outperforming expectations this much, what happens when the newer LFP packs, better thermal management, and smarter software hit their own 10-year mark? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more videos that actually cut through the noise with the actual data behind EVs, subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming.